If you're playing the new TFT patch 13.3 and you're tired of needing things like an emblem or specific augment or item, let me introduce to you a stable, strong composition recommended by the world champion himself, Sentinel Academy Flex. Because it gives you a bunch of free items and it utilizes both physical and magical damage components really well, you have many flexible options, and it's definitely a composition you can safely default into as well as play for a high cap win rate. So in this episode of Into Deep, we're gonna hop on board with Professor Dishsoap himself and see if he can educate us a thing or two and take us to school. Let's break down the core game plan of how to approach Sentinel Academy Flex. The core units are always going to want to stay the same, around 3 Academy at least, which is Jace, Leona, and Heimerdinger. And then the Rebel and Sentinel core of Alawi, Irelia ends up being really powerful to bolster the front line. And because Ezreal's a Rebel and Academy unit, it all ties together really nicely. Ezreal ends up often being an item holder for Jace, and also even being an item holder for Corki in the mid game. And so he's going to be a really important unit to play around. Do not sell Ezreal in the early game. The highest cap version that people tend to play around is around Scrap, where you play Corki, who's an artillerist that ties in with Ezreal, and then Rumble is a Sentinel and a Scrap, and a perfect AP item holder as well. If you get Rumble 2 with a bunch of upgrades, he will carry and end the game for you. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you actually have other options you can play around, such as sorcerers. Because Lux is a sorcerer, you're able to tie in units like Zoe and LeBlanc, and you can use that on top of your Heimerdinger and your Jace. And then because Zoe is a Rebel and you're already playing 3 Rebel units, you can actually play 5 Rebel with Jinx and take out these other units instead. So you have a lot of flexibility within that core package to navigate around that. If your Academy is also insane with a bunch of really strong items, you can also just play 6 Sentinel and then play with more Academy. If you play around Heimerdinger, for example, you want the Visionary. Rel is that Visionary Sentinel. You can always throw in the Loris, and then Lux is just the extra Academy unit on top. And it shouldn't come as a surprise, but 6 costs are also really good in this composition as well. Victor not only drops the big stun, but he also shreds and sunders, which is really powerful because we're both playing physical and magic damage, so he provides that instant utility. Warwick with items is just really good cleanup, so that way you make sure that Heimer and Jace are always killing things. And then Mel provides a bunch of shielding and a bunch of damage, and that shield is really valuable because Sentinels give you a bunch of resistances, and that shield scales really well with that MR and armor, so really good stuff. Here are the best in slot items for the Academy units, and this will also serve as your Academy item guide. Basically, if you see these items on the Academy sponsored for the game, that means that this is a good Academy setup potentially. Jace really wants 1 mana item generation, which often is Shojin, and then he wants the Infinity Edge and the Guard Breaker so they can max out his crit. But if you don't have Guard Breaker, you can always play Giant Slayer, and you can always just stack attack damage items like Deathblade as well. I want to give a shout out to Ruden's Hurricane. This actually ends up being insane on Ezreal because Ezreal's ability is an empowered auto attack, meaning that when he casts, he also activates Ruden's Hurricane. So there's some really powerful synergy. So if you end up playing Ruden's Hurricane on Ezreal, you might be able to just play that all the way into getting to Jace and then replacing those items onto Jace and playing Ezreal Jace as your duo. So if you end up seeing Ruden's Hurricane on Academy, you play it on early Ezreal, and that tempo alone should get you to level 9 as long as you have Ezreal 2 and maybe Corki 1, Heimer as your duo carry, because it's such a powerful interaction. And then you can either choose to keep that Hurricane onto Ezreal, move it off of him and put it onto Jace, or even just duo carry Ezreal Jace in the late game. Heimer's best in slot is mana generation, AP, and Gunblade. The Gunblade is really powerful to sustain the Sentinels because Heimer's going to continue to scale and heal that front line as much as he can. But a lot of people get baited into thinking they have the greed into blue buff and archangels. Sometimes I see people play like, Shojin, Nashor's archangels, and that's good enough. Some people end up going for, blue buff, death cap, jewel gauntlet. You can't always greed for hyper best in slot, but use the Academy items to help layer into that. One, for example, that's pretty good is Adaptive Helm. This ends up being the second best mana item behind blue buff. It's much better than Shojin. This is sometimes an Academy item. Just play Adaptive on that Heimer as a mana source and get that extra damage amp. Heimer is also a really good holder of things like Morellonomicon and Anti-Heal, and I think a lot of people forget that because they're always thinking about Sunfire, but sometimes you don't get Sunfire because, you're building things like Warmogs, Redemption, maybe there's like a Crown Guard or Stoneplate Gargoyle for your Academy items. So when you can't get that, just put the Morello onto the Heimerdinger. Ends up being pretty good. The last is the tank items. You end up putting it onto Alawi the most often, but just give her whatever Academy tank item plus anything else that's left over. Bramble, Dragon's Claw, Protector's Vow, Warmog's Redemption. You could just justify a lot of it Just make sure that you have 3 item on Alawi. Do not, under any circumstance, be stuck on 2 item tank, because even though you're playing a lot of Sentinels, that's still going to put you in a really bad spot. And remember, stacking Academy always gives lots of damage amp. You're going to see a lot of crazy builds, like, for example, stacking 3 Infinity Edges onto Jace, and then maybe even 2 Infinity Edges on the Ezreal or Corki as well. And then you're going to look at that and be like, is that too crazy, too much? 5 Infinity Edges on the enemy team? Not when you have the Academy items allowing you to stack it and get for some crazy crit damage builds. To give you perspective, if you go 5-6 Academy and you have, 3 Infinity Edges, that's like also having a Radiant Giant Slayer on your Jace. So it's a lot of damage amp. Do not sleep on it. Going over augments for Academy, there's nothing that's like particularly super insane. If you look at the list here, all of these are just like really good augments, but nothing like makes it super incredibly powerful. Perhaps the most OP thing in general is just really good econ, because you ultimately want to get to 8, roll, hit a bunch of 4 costs like Alawi, which can be really contested, Heimer and Corki, and then ideally go to 9. You don't want to be stuck on level 8 no matter what. So stuff like Fire Sale, this is like one of the most OP silver augments like just ever. It's super good, and it just gives you so much potential. But any other econ augments in general could be really good to get you started, and try to take econ early. Glass Cannon ends up being really decent because of damage amp for your backline, and because you're playing things like Gunblade on Heimer, it ends up healing pretty fast. Mana Flow is good for mana, and this also is both for the gold and silver. If you want to force Academy Abyss, think about Pandora's items. You get a bunch of free items as well from Academy, so item collector is always nice. All that shimmers, I mean, this augment is still just really broken when you get gold collector, and ends up being good on Ezreal, really good on Corki, really good on Jace. Surprise, surprise. Don't be afraid to take any of these crests. If you do end up taking Academy crest, try to play for 5-6 Academy, and try not to play 6 Sentinel unless you have a Sentinel crest, because you end up having a really awkward board. But sometimes you might have to, because that's just what you have available to you. Little Buddies is good because it gives you stats for playing a bunch of cheap Sentinels and Lux. And then Inspiring Epitaph ends up just being generic combat. I mean, it's always good. One augment in particular that I think is really underrated for Academy in general is Quality over Quantity, because you get all your Radiant items and it works on the Academy. So it helps you get so much tempo, and you get to basically push to level 9 because you have so much quality items. Coronation is very generically powerful. You're always going to want to take something like this. Piercing Lotus ends up being really useful in something like Academy, because it can be kind of tricky to build so much AP and AD, but then you have like the Spark and the Last Whisper. It's kind of hard to like have all of those items. And so Piercing Lotus actually gives you the critical strike chance, plus it just gives you guaranteed Shred and Sunder as well, which is really nice for a hybrid composition. Flurry Blows ends up being really good whenever there is an Academy that gives you Infinity Edge or Jewel Gauntlet. In fact, there's actually an Academy sponsor variation that has both. Flurry of Blows is fantastic in that variation, because then you end up getting a bunch of attack speed, which works as mana generation, and then you can stack a bunch of Infinity Edges and Jewel Gauntlets. And because you end up playing oftentimes just like 4 backliners, Calculated Enhancement ends up just being a lot of flat stats, which is always really nice with damage amp. Finally, some anomalies to think about. You can always just take, generic attack damage and damage amp for Corki and Jace. These are just like some of the better ones to think about. You just want raw attack damage for the most part, because you get a lot of damage amp. Comeback Story is just something to think about because it's generically good. Heimerdinger really wants mana, kill streak, and nothing wasted. Yeah, nothing wasted is nerfed and 50%, but it's still something that you want on Heimerdinger because you want him to spam cast as much as you can. Magic training for Heimerdinger is only if you can't get something like Archangels and you're just stuck with like infinite mana. I've seen people do like blue buff, Shojin Nasher, magic training, and magic training is the Archangels. Like every time you cast, Heimer's ramping up more AP. So that's like the way you can kind of get a budget Archangels. And then the last thing I want to note is that Rumble ends up being a really good anomaly as well if you high roll it early. And if you don't have Alawi, or you have Alawi 1, you can totally just put the anomaly on Rumble and just give him tank stats, because Rumble actually does so much damage. Every single time he casts, he puts out thousands of damage. So if you give him defensive anomalies, he'll cast a few times per fight and swing things completely. Dramatic Entrance in general is quickly becoming one of my favorite anomalies in the game. Very powerful, combos so well with Victor, as well as a bunch of other stuns, so do not sleep on it. Let's hop on board with World Champion Dishsoap's POV. He's playing on the quote new portal Vander, which gives you 3 gold augments. So it's functionally like a no encounter portal, but at least you know what to expect. A lot of people think it's a little bit boring, but that makes it less volatile in terms of like, the crazy prismatics or Ambessa giving you 3 golems. Already right away, Dishsoap is thinking about how to play around Academy because he has an Ezreal that dropped out of a box, and now all he's to find is Lux and a Leona, and he has a really good, powerful start. He's going to buy out the shop because he has 4 gold, so it might as well use all of his gold to hold pairs. And in this early stages of the game, just try to play around the pairs the best you can. Even though these are bruisers and not sentinels, they are the most likely units to be upgraded, and you just want to play the strongest possible board you can on the early stages of the game. Academy is not really that good of a composition to play from loose streak because oftentimes you're trying to find the cheapest board to sacrifice your HP on stage 4 to get to level 9. The cheaper you can have a board to skip level 8, the better. Let's take a look at his augments here and discuss it. Rocket Collection is quite interesting because you get a Tristana Urgot, and you are going to be trying to aim around artillers by playing Ezreal. The problem is this is a really, really slow augment, because the 75 rockets are every few attacks your artillerist does, so it takes a really long time. Basically, you only get 1 gold collector, and sometimes you make it to 2 gold collectors by the end of the stages of the game. So rocket collection is something that's like a delayed payoff. Investment strategy is too committal. This is something you play for if you're trying to reroll in general, because the units you play early are the things that you invest into. Very common for like Sentinels if you play around Renata and Visionaries. Maybe you play investment strategy into like family reroll, but not really something that we're thinking about at the moment. 2-Trick is the safe and solid choice. You just get 2 random 2-stars, and that ends up just giving you a lot of tempo, so that way you can have a strong board for stage 2. And also, if you don't like them, you can always sell them for econ. So it's a pretty safe option to hold, but I'm also willing to look at some other options here. He rerolls all 3 of his augments, and I think All That Shimmers is going to be the clear pick here. It's just everything you possibly could want. It gives you the gold in the early game to help make your interest threshold. It also gives you 1 item up over people that don't pick an item. So you're going to have higher tempo, and you have a really good holder of it in someone like Ezreal, for example. So it's the clear pick. If you didn't have it, I would consider taking something like Mace's Will so I can slam an immediate item. You want to be taking something like this component when you can make something immediately to have impact. If you take Mace's Will but don't use the gloves, then why would you take it? Feels like it's a lot lower value. In this spot, probably take Mace's Will and then same Infinity Edge, but it's worse than All That Shimmer, so we're going to skip it. And then Caretaker's Favor. This one is a lot better when you're on an econ portal of some kind. If you're playing on something like Gold Subscription, for example, you get so much econ that it makes Caretaker's Favors much easier and reliable to get to. So that way it doesn't feel like the delayed payoff is that much of a setback. All That Shimmers into Gold Collector. He did have an option of potentially taking something like Mogul's Mail and slamming a Stone Plate. But that's just not really a thing this set. Last set, that was something you'd played if you had like a Wukong, because Wukong was fantastic. But in general, this set, Stone Plate Gargoyle is just generally not that good of an item because late game, there's just not many good holders of it at all, if any. In fact, I can't really think of that many units that want to be solo frontline, like a true solo frontline. A lot of frontlines, in fact, want to play around things like Garen and other ways to like bolster frontline through redemption and having a line. There's just no real true solo frontline right now in the game. Okay, it looks like we picked up a Watcher, so we're going to want to get that Watcher in. And I think a lot of people kind of struggle in these kinds of spots, like, oh, I have a 2-star Trundle. Oh, I have like a 2-star Darius. What should I activate? Activate whoever's the better early game tank in this spot. And Darius is the better tank here because Trundle actually is more of a damage guy than a tank. I like how he's also positioned his Darius further ahead so he can maximize his AoE. Sometimes people just put like unit Darius unit, and then by having the 1, 2, 3, you reduce his surface area, and he's not going to hit as many units because he just does a 1 hex radius. So trying to get some maximum Darius value here. Pretty close fight, but he collected 2 gold, and we are off to the races. Finds an Urgot pair, so he could justify replacing the Trundle with this to activate Artillerist. And I think in this case, he's going to make gold to try and get his economy started. By the way, his chat right now is actually asking why not slam Stoneplate, and I think Dishsoap explained that there's just not many good holders of it right now. One thing that's nice about Urgot as well is that he actually provides a lot of anti-armor, so he shreds the opponent as well in a small AoE. So Urgot ends up being something that like is like a soft version of Last Whisper, which is really, really nice for the team. Okay, that being said, we end up going against the Trundle, who ends up just farming us, so a little bit of a loss. And that's a good thing, because it would be too high roll if Dishsoap just 5-streaked. It'd be too easy. All right, on Carousel, we're going to go ahead and take this belt and go for Sunfire Cape. And the Sunfire Cape is just one of the best items to slam in general, especially early game when we're lacking a little bit of damage. Fights are really slow. Sunfire is really, really good. We find a Tristana and we level to get the Conquer. And this is really powerful because, you know, we're getting the Conquer activated for Darius to deal more damage. We can slam Sunfire, and then we can also put the Cloak on Darius to maximize a little bit of his health as well. All right, QM against level 4 player. This should be pretty easy as well. And I kind of like the fact that we don't have like that big of an academy high roll start with like the Leona and the Lux to show that he can just bridge his way back in anyways, despite not having that. I wonder if he wants to make 20 here. He does. And I think this is actually really important because a lot of people would hold. There's so many pairs, right? They're having Urgot pair. Like, what if I hit Urgot too? But the reality is that's not likely to happen, one, given that looks like a lot of people are playing Urgot in the lobby. But also, he really needs to focus on his level 8s. I think a lot of people just are not thinking about how much economy that is needed to get to level 8 and roll for not 1, not 2, but ideally 3 forecast. That just requires you to have so much gold. So no time like the present. He's not on a win streak right now, so prioritize making that econ. Okay, another experiment player in the lobby. So a lot of people reveal themselves to be big Twitch players. We're also going to see some cooking pot action with Twitch. So there's going to be a lot of powerful late game builds if they can get that Twitch experiment board online. Holy moly, this guy has Urgot too. And he's getting copies of it too. Experiment right now is just such an insane emblem to get in the early game. Oh wow, we hit an early Alawi, and that's really fortunate for us. And we can actually lean into that if we want to as well by trying to play some Rebel. And he plays the Irelia, so we're now starting to transition immediately into that Sentinel build. So that's really good. So that's, you know, some of the high rolls and the low rolls. We basically didn't pick up that many 2-star earlies outside of Darius. And so as a result, we didn't win streak, but we picked up an early Alawi, which ends up being quite good here. And now the next level for 6 is going to be pretty easy. We're just going to be looking to try and play a 4th Sentinel. Oh my God. That's also a Heimerdinger, which is really good. And so now we have the early Academy. Jesus, this is actually so crazy of a start here. And the first Academy item here is Guardbreaker, and he's going to look to complete his 3 items. Ends up going for a Ruined Hurricane. And this is a really important thing to know, is that he wants to try and complete 3 items as best he can. And we talked about how that Ruined Hurricane is fantastic for Ezreal as an early game item holder. On his 3-2 augment, we have Sentinel Crest, Item Collector, and Spirit Link. If he takes Sentinel Crest, he gets to play for 4 Sentinel right now, and then maybe 6 Sentinel later. The quote downside of hitting that Heimerdinger so early is that he doesn't have as good of a front line by playing around 4 Sentinel. Item Collector is also really good for Academy because you get so many free items, and it's a pretty decent amount of value even right now because you're just going to get like a lot of HP as the time goes on, and you get more Academy items if you take in Lux. Spirit Link is surprisingly actually a pretty solid augment too, but the thing about Spirit Link is that it's not going to get a lot of value till the very end stage of the game. But it ends up being pretty good in like a Sentinel-based competition because you have so many resistances. I think I would favor Sentinel Crest here, but I'm curious what he's going to pick. He's cast around. He's a Rebel player, Ambusher player. He's a Zeri player. Okay. So some of the information. He looks like he rolls and he's going to settle on Item Collector. But very quickly, let's talk about these other augments real quick. Crown's Will. This is something that's kind of awkward for Academy because he's splitting his itemization for AD and AP, and it's not consistent. The only time you would take Crown's Will is if he absolutely needs his rod because this game's unplayable without it. That's just not the case right now, especially in Academy. Vampiric Vitality is much better for a melee carry because the melee gets in, it needs the Omnivamp to heal back up, but Ezreal's going to be pretty safe. He doesn't need the Omnivamp right now, and there's no threat to our backline. So Item Collector, we talked about how it's good with Academy, and I think that he could go for Item Collector right now and just get a nice boost of power. I said that he didn't have 4 Sentinel, but that was because he was level 5, and for some reason, I kind of thought he was already at level 6 because he has so many 4 costs on 5. So, yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense to take Item Collector in this spot since he already has the Sentinel ready to go. And now that he's playing around Heimerdinger, he's going to want to play around Rel because it activates Visionary. This is actually going to be something interesting of a dynamic, which is if he hits something like Rumble, I'm always curious to see if the players that hit Rumble are willing to take out Rel, because if they're playing on Heimerdinger, that Heimerdinger becomes weaker. And so that dynamic is going to be a little bit interesting to pay attention to later on. He ends up selling a Rel and finds another Rel in the shop. That's a little bit unfortunate, but like we said, you have to aggressively make that gold. And then another element too is that he knows that he's contested. And when you're contested, it's really important that you focus on economy, especially if you don't have a natural econ augment like Slammin', like Raining Gold. When you have those econ augments, you're going to be making econ much more aggressively, and it's going to become a lot natural. But because he doesn't have that inherently, he has to try and rack up as much gold as possible because he's just going to be contested. In fact, someone already has an Alawi. So someone else is also high rolling in the lobby. They have Mbessa. They have Alawi. There's an Alawi on Carousel. He's probably not going to get it. And Alawi is just going to be a really, really difficult unit to get this game. So yes, Dishsoap has some of the high roll components early, but he already anticipates that he's going to be in a little bit of a tricky spot being so contested. So what he's going to need to think about is, how am I going to play around some cheap board alternatives to get to level 9 without having to depend on hitting all the forecasts the way everyone else is. Okay, we hit a Corki as well, and so we're going to be able to level for that Corki, and we complete a Bramble Vest. He also has a Lux, so he has the availability of playing around it. His next item would be Static Shiv, which is not particularly super powerful on Heimerdinger, so activating Artillers I think is a little bit better. And then I think a lot of people are wondering, is it better to play around Ezreal or Corki in this position? And I think it's because he has Rebel as his core centerpiece trait. Oh my god, a double Jinx shop. There is some crazy high rolling going in this lobby. The other Academy player has also the Alawi. Does someone have Jace? Someone has Jace already in Experiment, which is also crazy. Apparently, everyone has high-end shopping and now have level 8 odds as opposed to level 7. I don't get it. The thing is, if he takes his Jinx, it is extremely expensive for his composition, and he has to pivot into Rebels, which is going to be really tricky to do because, yes, he does have some of the Rebel core, but he can't get to 8 and hold his Jinx. And what if he never hits Jinx 2? Okay, he's going to hold 1 Jinx, but I agree with this. I think he should hold the line, not get baited by this Jinx pair, because like if he gets the Rebel setup, maybe, but he doesn't even have that good Jinx setup without a mana item. One thing about Jinx is that you kind of need to have mana items for Jinx in order for her to actually cast. If you put things like Runins, Deathblade, and Gold Collector, she's going to take forever to get to her Mega Death Rocket. And so by the time she casts, the fight is going to be likely over if she even does cast. So I like that he holds 1 just in case. And also he needs to hold all those pairs. But he's just going to make sure to play to his outs right now. Okay, looks like we have Corki pair and we have Heimer pair now. So I think he's thinking about how he wants to itemize. And at the moment, he has the ability to go for Redemption and Last Whisper. He's trying to think about completing his items here. He has Item Collector, so he wants to get maximum value. If he's going to make Last Whisper, he wants to stack the items onto the same unit. So that's totally fine. Guard Breaker is a pretty versatile item. You can put it on both an AD or an AP champion. Okay, we're going up against Malala, Set 10 World Champion. And looks like he is playing a Conqueror setup here. All right, we're going to get ready to go to level 8. Let's see what the Augment has in store for us. Okay, well, I guess it was a Rebel game. He would have had the Rebel Crest, and then would have had the Jinx pair and would have been able to play into the Rebels. I still don't know if he could do that, though. He did get a tier, so maybe you have to play around that. But it just requires him to pivot, and it's a pretty expensive pivot because he still has a couple of items that he wouldn't know what to do with. Going back a little bit, let's just say theoretically he did hold the Rebel Jinx. What would he do with these items? Who would the Runins go on? I guess he would have to play Rebel Corki and then go, Deathblade, Gold Collector, Jinx. Hold this tier, still have no sword item. Hold this tier, have no mana item here for Jinx, and then be stuck with awkward items. And that's what he has to play. Then he's going to be floating a bunch of components. And he also has to hold a really big bench because he would still have to try to pivot into Rebels. It's just really expensive of a pivot. So it's probably not going to be Rebel Crest. Little Buddies is really good. Because you're playing so many cheap Sentinels like Irelia, we're going to be hanging on to Rel because we're playing around Heimerdinger. And we even have the excuse to maybe play around Lux and Academy with Leona. That's 4 buddies. It's a lot of value. So I think it has really good synergy. Not to mention that ultimately the most important units in our composition are 4 and 5 costs. So, Ezreal is not that important. And we're going to get off of Ezreal care eventually. Little Buddies is A+ for me. Duo Q is okay, I guess, if we really needed it. This is simultaneously both fishing for Jace and Rumble, as well as maybe some econ and items. It's okay. It has synergy with Item Collector. I would say that it would be much better if we didn't have such good augments like Little Buddies. But I wouldn't pick it here in this spot. Salvage Bin at 4-2 is a desperation option. You're only supposed to take it if you are absolutely item screwed, or you're doing a pivot. Maybe you're playing a Rebel Jinx pivot because, I don't know, maybe 2 Jinxes show up in the shop or something like that. But Hey, no one's that good at TFT. And heroic grab bags for reroll, so it's got to be little buddies here, 100%. All right, we're leveling to 8s, and we are looking for upgrade frontline, which is really important. The Rel comes in, and I think this is a really important thing to note, is that he sold the Rels, but he's going to roll gold. Rel comes back. Ah! It was Jinx too. It was a Rebel Jinx. Oh man, his chat is making him remember exactly. Okay, but we hit the Alawi too, and okay, it's pretty smooth sailing, all things considering. But I like that he demonstrates that you can also just splash in something like the Mbessa, because the Mbessa is a conqueror that links with the Rel and just gives you some cheap stats for defensive traits like resistances. But I think because he hit Alawi too, he recognizes that his spot's pretty contested this game. Like, you know, someone's holding Corkies. It's not going to hit Jace. He doesn't even have any items onto Heimerdinger, by the way. Okay, well, he ends up naturalling Heimerdinger, which surprisingly, naturalling this Heimerdinger is not that good without that items, because if he doesn't have any items for Heimer, it doesn't actually do anything. But it's definitely nice to have. But I would say that his setup here with the items all just have a lot of good cohesive strategy. So yes, Dishsoap is high rolling this game, but he's navigating it very well, and he's converting off of it very cleanly. Going up against Twitch 2 with the Jace, Mundo pair, Elise as well. And I think this board should actually be beating us here. It's very close, but looks like Twitch is going to be too strong. But I think that's okay, and that's ultimately why it was important to protect our HP as much as we can, because on stage 4, we need to figure out the cheapest viable board that we can get to level 9 with without having to overroll. Because if we roll to 0 every single turn to look for Corki 2, not only are we not going to find it easily because it's a contested unit, but then we're not going to be able to get to 9 for a really long time. And because we protected all that HP on stage 2 and stage 3, even though we weren't full streaking on stage 2, for example, we're going to trade that HP to get to 9. So I think losing these next couple fights, totally okay. And we're going to get to 9 around 5-1, 5-2. He takes a tier here off of Carousel, and that's because he has a Heimer too, so he wants to start building into Heimer items. Over time, you should be able to get some Heimer items as well. We position away from the right side because we saw that a Camille player was here. He ended up switching as well. So he's taking tabs on what his opponents are doing positioning-wise to exploit him, because he's been kind of AFK positioning in the bottom right. Ironically enough, that ended up being something that put his Ezreal in harm's way, because there's a Lux here with Sentinel that actually almost killed our Ezreal. But that's okay. I think we just have a lot of raw power here. All right, here comes the Anomaly turn. Stone Skin is something that you could take, but that's something that like Sentinels are already good at. They get so many armor and magic resistance. You want something else that complements that, as opposed to just pile on more armor and MR, because that's just more additive scaling as opposed to like being able to do multiplicative scaling. You want a lot of HP, for example, in Alawi, because she has so much armor and magic resistance that makes the HP more effective. He rolls and gets Kill Streak. This is actually Heimerdinger's best Anomaly, but he has no Heimer items. This is a little bit awkward. If he took it, he would have to like put this Guard Breaker onto Heimerdinger and start carrying him with 1 tier. So a little bit awkward. But he is coming up on next turn having items, so he could theoretically justify taking this to try and get a mana item later for Heimerdinger. But this one's a little bit awkward right now. Dramatic Entrance. Ooh, I love this one. This one is actually really good. The issue is, if he puts this on Alawi, he actually has a problem with his front line, because when Alawi disappears, yeah, she comes back with max HP, but look at the rest of the army if he has Dramatic Entrance on it. The awkward thing is that usually you want to put Dramatic Entrance on your tank, but he might put it on somebody else. I just don't know who, because the best unit to put this on is probably Mbessa, because she ends up being positionally flexible and she's not part of the front line. You can take this on Alawi and then hope that it holds out, but it ends up making your rest of your front line pretty vulnerable. Maybe he puts it on somebody that's not Alawi, like maybe he puts it on Rel, for example. Oh wow, he's actually going to put it onto a Leona 1. That's interesting, because the 55% HP gain is not that important. I think it's because in the later stages of the game, there's actually a chance he doesn't play around Rel because he doesn't have items on Heimer. So if he put it on Rel 2 and he hits a Rumble, he's going to feel really bad. He can't take Rel out, because if you hit Rumble, you absolutely play Rumble over Rel in this position, because we're not playing around Visionary for the Heimerdinger. So this is actually pretty clever. He's also doing a neat little trick here. if you actually position the dramatic entrance unit right here, it's almost like this unit spot is still being taken up. And so Leona jumps exactly at that spot again. And that actually walls off melee champions. So Dishsoap actually showing off a little bit of moves here. There's some tricks that he's trying to do to manipulate this Camille. It might end up not working anyways because the Camille's on the other side. But a little clever trick there for anybody that takes dramatic entrance. You can basically confuse some melee units because let's say they had everything on the right here, like against this Vander, for example. That Vander would attack this Leona, and then the Leona disappears, and that Vander would walk all the way around and just kind of lose some pathing and valuable seconds in a fight. All right, looking for our components here, and we get the mana item for Heimer. But this still doesn't justify the kill streak because we would only have 2 items on Heimer. We are only getting 1 extra component. And it would have been so awkward if we had kill streak and only 2 item Heimer. So I think that restraint was actually really important for Dishsoap. I may have gotten baited by that because I'm like, oh, I have a tier. I can play for it. But then I would have been stuck in this exact position. I have 2 item on my anomaly carry and that would have felt really bad. Okay, we're going up against Zeri 3. Oh, wait, it actually happened. Look what happens. Rewind. It actually happened. Look. The Vander actually punches the Leona, or not, and then he just walks all the way around. He manipulates the positioning this way. Dramatic interest. And that actually has good synergy because that just allows Alawi as the main tank to get even more stall away from some of those enemy threats. Oh, okay. Some nifty positioning tricks there end up paying out. All right, looks like we're going to go to 9 pretty soon. I think we should go here. I think we could justify greeting one more round, but I still think it's just worth going on a natural interval. We're looking for Jace. Jace is going to be the best carry you can play here. You could also justify just splashing at other units as well. So he's going to play 5 Rebel temporarily. Apparently, Jinx really wants to hang out. Okay, finds the Jace. And Texan a Ziggs for the scrap. Okay, a little bit awkward. Gets a Shiv for Heimer. Not his best item, but hey, 3 item carry is better than 2 items spread out everywhere. That's just a fundamental rule. But unfortunately, I think that we're playing as Ziggs on our board. So a little bit unfortunate. We need to improve our board slot. Put another way, we went to 9 to roll for Jace and play Ziggs, which is not very, very good. And then also, of course, we mispositioned our Hex Core as well. They did nerf Jace recently, so it used to be that when Jace casted, he would revive the turret, and then the turret would actually buff with the attack speed. But that doesn't happen anymore. He has to have the Hexforge alive. But these days, what people do is they just play this Hexforge for extra frontline. And that makes sense too, because, you know, we're kind of dependent on just this Alawi. We're going to go ahead and remove these items because we're playing Little Buddies. Little Buddies has 0 value for 3 costs. Whenever you have Little Buddies, try not to play your 3 costs on the board unless absolutely necessary. Ezreal is necessary. And if we do, don't itemize him. Get the attack speed items onto Jace. And Jace is very much outperforming. Just look at this damage. It's 5,000 damage on a Jace 1. Still really good, even without his turret cheese. It's just the sum of his parts. Wait, actually, even Ezreal doing a lot of damage. Good lord. Okay. I think we're probably going to look for another item for Corki, or we're going to start building into Rumble. Both are viable. I think stacking Rumble is just generally really, really good. Okay, he takes this. Oh, it's also a Corki 2. But it's a Morel. Okay, well, that's funny. All right, so he took this to guarantee Corki 2. But the irony is, of course, that he would have hit the Corki 2 anyways. Okay, so he's going to move items onto the Corki 2 instead and turn Jason to utility. I see. So the Corki 2 is because Corki 2 is better than Jace 1 in his mind. And he wanted to get 3 items onto Corki carry, and he can scrap that sword on the Rumble instead. Okay, so a little bit of a hybrid of what we were talking about. I was thinking like having complete items on Corki and maybe something for Rumble, and he found a way to do both. Very nice. And it's just Jace 1, so you don't actually even need to think about Jace as being the definitive carry. Yes, we're playing around Academy, but this Corki ends up doing 9,000 damage, and that item redistribution is looking like it was very, very smart. I think his synergy bar also is going to be confusing. Some people are going to think, oh, we have 5 Sentinel, 4 Academy. Why not just replace something like Rel to play a Lux 1 for Little Buddy's value and get 5 Academy? It's like a better synergy. The reality is he's still playing on Heimerdinger, so you want to try to like maximize around that. And also, His front line is still a little bit on the sus side. Oh my god, wait a second. Look at this. The Camille gets completely stunned, and she doesn't fight for 7 seconds because of that dramatic entrance. Oh my gosh. Wow, that dramatic entrance is paying off huge dividends. What a crazy 5-head take here. Wow, that Camille player is pissed. I would be pissed too. Okay. Oh, okay. So he actually found the 5 Academy, and he took out the Irelia. Interesting. Okay, so he's going for this, and he gets the 5th. Oh, all right. So we're ended up replacing Irelia. Irelia is not that important. Rebel only gives 12% HP to the Alawi, and we did hit the Rumble, and the Academy gives a Bloodthirster for the Rumble. So when you kind of frame it that way, I didn't realize that BT was the 3rd item for Academy. That makes it a lot more convincing, and he still gets to play the Vertical Academy, which kind of buffs everything else. You could justify taking a Heimer item here, like Jewel Gauntlets. You could also justify taking something for Rumble as well, if you want. And he's going to turn Jace into utility. Okay, really interesting. Going up against Scrap and Rumble 2. This enemy board is really strong. They have so much Scrap shield. It's going to be really difficult to beat this. Okay, a narrow loss. We're trying to go to level 10, though. He's still holding on to 1 Irelia, I think, just because it's a unit that he can play on 10. He could justify playing the Rebel back onto his late game board. The 12% HP on Alawi the Rebel is definitely pretty useful. But I think he's going to go to 10 and just look for 6 costs if he can. Okay, going up against a Ghost. The Vander moving all the way around is so funny to me. Wait, Corki, for some reason, flew all the way to the front. Okay, and now we're fading back. All right. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly why Corki did that, but sometimes Corki goes wherever he pleases. I guess him and Dr. Mundo get along. Oh, they said that Corki chased the Vander. Oh, I guess there's a little bit of downside to that because maybe the unit just locks onto it. All right, well, Dishsoap is already top 4. This is the phase where I think the game starts to kind of play itself. He's going to sack one more fight, go to level 10, roll, look for a 6 cost, look for Rumble 2, and close out the game that way. And he has also some splashes. Remember how he played Mbessa? He can still splash the Mbessa. If he gets a Sentinel Emblem, he could take a Sentinel Emblem and play around the Irelia. He could also just play like an Elise, get some Form Swapper in. You have a lot of different options. Oh, wow. A 1 HP loss to a Caitlyn, too. Okay, Great is dead. There is Mel and Warwick on the carousel. Neither of them are holding that great items, though. It's Even Shroud and Spark, and those are items that we don't really need. But it is a Warwick. And Warwick is quite good right now in the patch. Just takes Even Shroud. You can take Tank Buster. So our upgrades right now are Self-Destruct Button and Tank Buster. Those are 2 of the best. Okay, we just play a Warwick. You can even itemize Warwick with like Even Shroud as well if you want. Put on Rumble, doesn't really matter. I guess in this case, the argument is to put Even Shroud on Rumble to keep him a little bit alive longer. But I personally think Warwick with items this patch is very, very good. Okay, and he also positions Warwick towards the back because if you put Warwick towards the front, he ends up dying way too quickly. But they buffed Warwick this patch, and now just look at him. He's actually healing a lot, even with no items. Okay, you have to take a look at this. Warwick heals 6,000 HP. No items, just Warwick. He's so beefy and tanky, and he finishes off. Oh, speaking of finishing it off, we got Victor. All right, well, you know, it was fun to hang out with Warwick for a little bit, but the real star of the show has arrived. It is Victor. It's level 10. We have better odds. And that is how we do it. So we get to level 10, and this should close out the game. We hit Rumble 2, Victor. If we hit Jace 2, it is 100% wraps. We're going up against a really strong Enforcer board. Caitlyn 2, Vi 2, Rumble 2, Jace 2. Oh my gosh, the battle of the Set 10 and 7-11 World Champions. I just realized it's actually a duel. Ah, well, not much of a duel, is it? He's just clearing him, dealing a ton of damage. Law's actually playing the trait augment. Looks like it was Martial Law as well. So, some really cool stuff. I think Dishsoap is dancing with the idea of whether or not he wants to play Vander over the Lux. Lux is a 3rd Academy item. It's 5 Academy, and it's a little buddy's value. It's not as clear-cut as it might seem, because cutting Lux, is, for a Warwick is just a lot better for unit value, but the little buddy's value can't really be ignored that much, especially because he's not playing on Rebels. So if you just keep chipping away at your front line, like, if you just keep saying like, oh, I don't need Rebel, or I don't need little buddy's value, your front line is just going to be a little bit more fragile than you want it to be. And that is going to be it, I think. It looks like Dishsoap is going to end it. And the battle of the world champions goes to Dishsoap. So I hope that game, while it was high roll, showed you how Dishsoap converted his high roll, and more importantly, show you the versatility of his itemization. He didn't even necessarily play around Jace as his primary carry. He played around Corki, used Jace as utility, but if he hit Jace 2, he could have itemized Jace 2 with those Corki items and transferred it around. I also love that he showcased some other neat tricks and tips with things like positioning, things like showing off how good Warwick can be, as well as how he navigates some tough decisions. Is it 5 Academy? Is it 4 Sentinel? Are we playing Rebels on the board? Are we tossing in the Warwick and 6 cost? And he says, okay, when I have all these conditions set up and I have all the items the way I want it set up, that's the best way I can convert it to a first place. Truly a perfect player difference. All right, I hope you learned a thing or two from this Academy session. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.